Hello, New England and all over the interwebs. For those of you seeking to improve your home audio recordings for music or even your short films, you are in luck. My name is Justin. This is Video Creators Lounge, and today with us we have Anthony Schultz, owner and operator of Big T Productions with 30 years experience in audio engineering. Tony, welcome. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
And so today we're going to talk about all things audio and giving people a heads up on what they need to know, especially if they're just being, starting up, right?
Sure.
Terrific. So before we start, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, your experience, and all of that?
Sure. Well, I have a studio called Big T Productions in North Quincy, Massachusetts. I've been in business for over 30 years, so I've been doing it quite a while. I also teach audio technology and computer music for over 20 years, so I'm an educator and just been doing that for quite a while, and it takes up quite a bit of my time doing both that. So.
Sure, yeah, and you teach online courses at Berklee, you do one-on-one teaching, you run the studio, a whole host of things.
A lot of online teaching now, but both Berklee Online is always online, but my Bridgewater classes are online, and I do a lot of tutorial, teaching online. Just because I have students from all over the world, really. I've got a couple of students recently from China.
Okay.
So, it's very diverse in location, which the online educational model is pretty good for that. So I'm not really limited to Boston area, especially with lately being, everyone's stuck at home. You can be local, you can be far away, and I can still work with them. And, using the screen sharing and all that kind of stuff, we can get a lot done. So it's pretty effective.
Yeah, that's great. So you've been able to adapt pretty well, considering this unfortunate time. With
yeah,
COVID.
I was kind of doing it halfway anyway. Like with Berklee, that was online anyway, and I did some students online. So it's just kind of, I was doing some of that already, but it's good that I had set that up and had, enough equipment to, the small amount of gear you need to just communicate through the web and do the screen shares and things like that. So I was prepared for it. Let's put it that way. So.
Right, sure. And you graduated from Berklee,
Yep, in the late '80s, I got out of Berklee with a bachelor's degree in music production engineering, and then I started my own studio shortly after that in my apartment, and then just grew into a commercial space. And then I've been in North Quincy for this past summer was the 20th anniversary of being in that same location.
Congratulations! Yeah, that's a great achievement. Yeah. We're going to talk. You have a new online class that's available. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. But I thought it might be helpful for our audience. I've been interacting with a lot of musicians, up and coming musicians. Some are at different levels of experience, and of course, Video Creators Lounge. We're talking to a lot of filmmakers.
Right.
And audio is always a topic that comes up, and I thought it might be helpful to maybe talk about the progression that young artists might go through in terms of, when they first start recording audio, maybe with a limited budget, and then, what is a natural progression for someone just starting out, and what should they know, more importantly? And since you're here with all this expertise, I think that would be the most helpful for our audience. And I guess the starting point that I see is maybe a teenager with absolutely no money that is saying, "Wow, I want to start recording something." And the thought that came to my mind, and I know as an audio engineer, this is probably not something that you would enjoy. But if you had nothing, if you had no equipment, if you had no money, but you want to record something, right? I mean, the worst case scenario or the best case scenario, if you don't have anything else, is using a cell phone, right? So I mean, that is the starting point. Sure. Everyone has a cell phone. You use your Android or iPhone phone, and if that's all you got, then that's what you use.
Yeah. Well, the quality on that is good in general, and there's some mics you can buy for your iPhone. Like I started doing a little bit of video with the iPhone, and I bought a little lavalier, to clip on my shirt.
Sure.
That went right to the iPhone. So it was pretty decent. The problem you have with iPhones and such is that it's good for capturing sound, but when you want to either do an overdub or have multiple inputs, that's when you really start to need something else. Right. So it's not about quality. It's the fact that, you know, if you have a guitar and a voice and you've got these two different, you know, you could record that all at once, but you have no way to balance it.
Sure.
So that's the limitation that you quickly find is, I wish that guitar was louder, or I wish that the vocal had more reverb on it, or, you know, when you're wanting to do things to the recorded information that's all captured at the same time, you become very frustrated with the inability to work with it.
Sure.
And that's where you want to start thinking about, you know, capturing it, you know, in a way that you can control it independent of the other source, and maybe even record track after track, you know, because if you're a singer-songwriter, and, you know, especially with people not really being able to gather as often as previously, you don't want to throw some various vocal parts down, play a guitar solo over the rhythm part. You need usually you'll need a computer application that will allow you to kind of track on your laptop with just a very simple setup, and that's going to give you so much more flexibility.
All right.
Yeah.
So you're skipping ahead on me.
Okay, cool.
But no, this is good though.
But you quickly outgrow the iPhone really quickly.
I mean, you outgrow that immediately, right? So
Anybody,
you have an
not
iPhone,
just me, but like
anybody.
It's good quality, but you outgrow it because of the lack of the ability to control the sound.
Sure. So you start with you have no money, you're a teenager, maybe whatever the scenario is, you can record something on your phone. Then you could even plug a lavalier microphone into the phone as well.
Yep.
I think the iPhones, it would be a USB plug-in. Okay, so that's fine. That is first level starting point, right? Now, the interesting thing is, all right, now the next level. Now I have maybe a couple $100 in my pocket, and I'm getting a little bit more serious about recording, and the next step on this is, what would you say?
The next level would just be getting a 2-input interface. Okay,
well, you got to get a microphone first, right?
Well,
or you got to get them at the same time.
Yeah, you kind of need an interface, typically with 2 channels. They do make some have the Scarlett series has a solo. It's called a solo. With 1 input, but I would just say skip over that and have 2. 2 is the minimum I would recommend, because if you're singing and playing guitar, right there, you would need 2 inputs. So
sure.
I would go with a 2-input interface, very small, and you know, they're fairly affordable. They're under $200.
Yeah.
And then you just can, all you would need, you plug that into your computer, and all you would need really is a microphone or 2 to capture the sound into the computer with that. So you kind of want to buy that all together, but there's some very affordable microphones under $100. There's a couple of options I found that were 2 microphones that would be good for voice and acoustic guitar. You know, a pair of microphones for $100. There's some affordable things that are better than not having the higher quality. But it's a good place to start for microphones, because it's going to capture the sound, and you'll have control over the level of one versus the other into the computer.
Sure. So the next step up from the bottom, using a phone, is grab a mic and an interface, right? Now the interesting thing is, and you know, I'm totally in agreement and in line with you here, but the interesting thing is that you skipped over USB microphones, which you see them being sold online all the time. And I totally agree with what you just said. And then I could explain it, but I'd rather have you explain.
Well, to me,
why would you want to skip over, if you're a music artist or even a filmmaker, why would you want to skip over that, which can sometimes be even cheaper or more affordable?
Because it's the same thing as having an iPhone. You're either going to have one mic in an iPhone or one mic in a computer. So to me, that's the same level.
Right.
So I didn't skip a level. That is the same level. It's just a variation of, do you want to use your phone as the recording device, or do you want to use your computer as the recording device with one input?
Sure, yeah.
When you're using a USB mic into a computer, you can't use 2 USB mics. So that's the limitation. So that's why I think of those as the same level of startup. But some people would rather use their laptop, because then they have the audio file in their computer.
Sure.
And they can do other things with it or send it to people.
Sure.
Just like you could on a phone. So to me, that's the same level, but you're using either you're using a different device to capture
Right.
the sound
So
as a single source.
It's slightly better than using your iPhone,
A little
or
bit
maybe
better,
on
yeah.
par.
Yeah.
But if you have a trajectory in music or film, and you know you're going to continue to advance, then you're limited. And what's actually happening inside the microphone is that analog to digital conversion.
Right.
So there's, whether it's a little chip in there, and the quality,
Right.
you're not going to get nearly the quality. So for a little bit more money, you buy a dynamic microphone, and you plug it into an interface, and you're going to get a great result, a much better result.
Right.
For just a little bit more money.
And you said dynamic, but I would probably recommend getting a condenser mic potentially as your first microphone. If you're going to buy one mic, it probably should be a condenser mic.
All I need is
if
one
you're
mic.
recording, if you're recording. So like these microphones are good for dialogue.
Right.
And they're good if you're doing podcasting. Dynamic mics are good because they don't pick up the noise of a room.
Right.
But condenser mics are good for acoustic instruments, acoustic guitar. For singing voice, it's probably better for a singing voice. So, it's good to have at least one of each if you can. It just depends on what you're recording.
Sure.
It's really,
that makes a
really
lot of
dependent
sense.
on that for sure.
Yeah. Now we have some props that we brought with us that we will maybe take out in a little bit. But I mean, these microphones right here, they're dynamic mics. And for what we're doing right now, we're not in a studio setting. We're in kind of a living room setting here. The walls are not conditioned in any way. So what you just said makes perfect sense.
Yeah,
right?
these are good for what we're doing. Yeah.
So a dynamic mic is less likely to get some ambient noise, or if someone's honking their horn outside.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Now
it could still pick up some of those noises, but it's just not as sensitive to the sounds within the room. It's more sensitive to, that's why at a club, when people are singing into a mic, it's a dynamic mic. It doesn't pick up everything in the room because you don't want to. And they're very durable as well. So, some of those mics at the clubs, they're very, they have to withstand a lot of sound pressure levels. They have to withstand, people dropping them or throwing them around. So that's another thing. Dynamic mics are a more durable microphone as well.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. So let's say I had a musician in this living room setting. Now I have used condenser mics. So really for the sake of this conversation, we're just going to talk about two different microphones that are primarily used, condenser mics and dynamic mics. Right. There are others, but that's a little bit more, ribbon mics and all that, but we won't get into that today. But if we're looking at dynamic and condenser, if I had a musician here today, and sometimes I do, have a musician where I use a condenser mic. Again, we're not in a soundproofed environment. Is that okay?
Yeah, I mean, usually you want to get a little closer with it so you can turn down the input level. So you're kind of focusing on the source. Usually close mic is what you're looking to do when you don't want to capture the sound of a room that's not great. So you just put it closer to the instrument and just adjust, turn the level down so it's not going to distort. But by being closer to the sound source, you're not capturing as much of the room around it. So that's usually a tighter miking position is probably optimal for a room that's not ideal for recording.
Sure. Now, like right now, I'm a little bit closer to the mic than you are.
Right.
What's your take on all of that? Is that,
Well, I mean, everything matters. Your position matters. Your, like probably when I'm turning my head, it's going to lose a little bit of my focus, that kind of stuff. But in general, because I'm not competing with anything else in the room as far as instruments, it's probably okay. Because it's just picking up me and yours is just picking up you. So it's probably not as much of a concern as if we had somebody playing acoustic guitar sitting next to me, or if I'm playing an acoustic guitar. I would want this mic to be closer to my mouth if I had another instrument right below it, because it would pick that up as well. And I'd want to make sure that I was the focal point on this mic and another mic on the instrument. So
perfect. Okay. Yeah. All right. So then, starting off, phone. If you got nothing else, next step up would be grab a microphone. If you only have one, condenser microphone. You got to be a little bit cognizant of your room. If you're living in the city, or if there's a constant noise, then you may consider a dynamic microphone as your first, maybe.
Well,
if you can't quiet.
One thing I would recommend that's worth looking into in that situation And this isn't really talked about a whole lot, but it's a something I used to use for many years to keep the sound down in a non-adequate space. Is if you buy a microphone, let's say condenser mics are the ones that would have different switches on them for control of the sound. So what you're looking to do, and there's some really affordable mics that have this, even though they're not as good a quality as some of the more used ones. But if you can get what's called a large diaphragm condenser mic,
okay,
and it doesn't have to be expensive. There's some that are fairly affordable. But if you get a polar pattern switch that allows you to switch it to a bidirectional pattern, that's that figure 8 pattern.
Sure, yeah.
So that allows you to talk in the front, talk in the back, picks everyone up. So you could actually talk, sing, background vocals could sing to each other, and they capture the sound of both equally. However, anything that's not in front of the plus or minus side of the mic, when it enters into both sides of the mic, it cancels out.
Sure.
So if you're in a room that has air conditioning noise or whatever's going on outside, it will definitely cut some of that down. And I used to use that when I was doing voiceovers in a room that was a little bit noisier. I would able to bring the ambient noise down quite a bit because the bidirectional pattern cancels out a lot of the stuff that gets picked up on both sides at the same time.
Okay.
So that's one jump. If you're going to buy one good microphone,
I see.
It doesn't have to be expensive. I mean, I have a list of a few mics that are actually fairly affordable for, I think there was a mic that was $100 and it had polar pattern switches and things like that. Bidirectional switch is a very helpful thing to have in a home environment.
Sure. Okay.
That's one of a condenser mic is great, but it will pick up, because it'll be typically a cardioid pattern, which is kind of what these are, where it picks in the front. But a condenser mic is so much more sensitive that there will be some things on there that are not, maybe some unwanted noise. Okay. There are ways to fix that sometimes. And one of the things, where we might be jumping ahead on some of the things as far as software, but one of the free applications that you can use is Audacity.
Sure.
That's for Mac or PC. That's free software for recording.
And that's been around for a long time.
Right.
Audacity,
it's an open source thing. And it's a great free application. There's some really good things about it, and there's some limitations about it. But one really good thing that I find on Audacity that I use, even though I have high quality plugins for noise reduction, Audacity is very easy to cancel some of the noise on your recordings.
Okay.
So if you do have a regular condenser mic and you've got a little bit of noise, it's so easy to just put that track in Audacity, capture the noise profile, which is, right before you start recording or talking, capture that noise profile, and then apply it to your sound file with whatever control you want. You can adjust how much you're taking out, and it's amazing.
So you get kind of a baseline of the ambient noise before you start performing or doing anything, and it leverages that information to
you do it after the fact. You don't do it before. So basically you have the noisy file, and you capture something before it or after, before or after when there's only noise. Capture that profile, and then it processes it against that, and it runs through the whole track. So the whole track becomes clean. It's amazing.
That's nice.
For a free application. So I highly recommend Audacity for fixing those issues because it's very effective. Audacity is not that great for other plugins because it's destructive. So you have to commit to things, and that's not really good, because especially if you don't know what you're doing.
Sure.
And you commit to something that you wish you hadn't done. I mean, obviously you can keep copies of versions and stuff, but it just, when you finally get to the point where you're using real plugins and you realize how much difficulty you've had with using something that is you have to make decisions and commit to it. I know how that feels, because when I started recording, I was using a 4-track. And then you had to bounce tracks and go, okay, these 3 tracks have to go to track 4, and I'm making a commitment right now, and this is the way it's always going to be for the rest of my life. But you learn,
right?
I mean, the good side of that is that you learn how to make decisions as a producer, as an engineer. I don't like that, and I still don't want to bounce things. Luckily, I don't have to do that, but that decision making is part of it too. You need to learn how to make decisions and not just record a whole bunch of stuff and then save it to the end to figure out how you're going to use it, because then you have problems in other ways later on trying to sort through a lot of takes that you kept. So
it's interesting to think that there's a whole new generation that's never kind of experienced that pain, and the same in video and film, where you had to commit back on certain cuts as well, and now I don't like it, man. Just
or
Control Z,
or just the transferring aspect of recording it on tape and then
That's
transferring
right,
it,
that's
or
right.
capturing video, transferring it before you can even edit it. You got to capture it in real time, and
Yeah.
that saves a lot of time and aggravation, both for recording and for video.
All right, so the first microphone, if you can only buy one, buy a condenser microphone, and hopefully with some noise cancellation options and the right
Assuming that
patterns.
you're not trying to be a voiceover person.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're going to be a voiceover person and that's all you're going to do, probably getting something like this.
Okay.
Right? Or an SM7B, something that's like for, the things that you see the DJs using,
Right.
Or the sports radio shows, You see those guys with the big dynamic mics. They're in a studio, there's people shuffling papers. So these kind of mics are really good to just capture the voice, and it kind of doesn't pick up the sound of all the things going on in the studio. So it's very good for that.
Gotcha.
So that's why I say, if you have one of both, you can do the narration gigs, right? Voiceover podcasting. Then you can also do recording with a singing voice or an acoustic guitar. So it's good to have just a couple mics minimally, just so you can do one or the other.
So, and with a 2-channel interface, you can play guitar. If your guitar has a preamp, typically they have line in as well as microphone in options, right? So you could play your guitar and sing. A lot of them have a TS input capability.
Right, but the only problem with that is that you can only use two at once.
What's that?
So so if it's a 2-input interface, you've got, like on my interface, I've got 2 mic ins and 2 line ins, but I can only use 2 at one time. So I can't use 2 mic and 2 line at the same time.
Right, okay.
So you have to say, okay, input 1, input 2. You can choose what you're going to use, but you can't use all 4 of the options.
Okay.
So you are limited always to 2 channels, even though you can do line in or a mic in.
Okay.
But you just have to realize that you have no, and the reason why that's a problem for me, I mean, it's great when I'm doing my classes, because I talk into the mic. I have a 2-channel interface. I talk into the mic, and the other audio is coming from my computer, my application that I'm demonstrating. So I actually have a little application that feeds that audio through Zoom, feeds this through Zoom. So I don't really need a lot of inputs for those classes. But if you're trying to do maybe a live stream where you're recording a few people at once, you would probably want a larger interface so that you can control each person independently and not just put like one mic in the middle of the room and record it like that. So
yeah, but for if you're playing guitar and you're singing, that would work out great. All right, so you have the interface, you have at least one good microphone, and then the starting point for recording, at least maybe not so great for mixing necessarily, is Audacity. It's a free piece of software that you can load up on a PC or Mac, and you start using that, right? Okay. Now, I've nailed Stairway to Heaven on my guitar. I mean, I'm good at it now, right? What do I do next? What would be maybe the next progression up? All right, now I even want to get, even more refined with how I'm recording at home.
As a songwriter, trying to write like more arrangements, or what kind of recording? What do you?
Sure, yeah. As a singer-songwriter, guitar.
Well, I think as a songwriter, this is how I started. I didn't want to be in a band. I wanted to write songs, so I started a studio so I could use it for my own stuff. And then I found that, I can charge people to work with them, so to pay for the equipment.
Right.
So, I say that because a lot of my students that have a setup at home is minimal, like we've talked about, but they don't really think they don't really think about the possibilities of recording other people. And I tell them, just because you're a student doesn't mean you can't, bring on clients and charge them a little something for your time.
Sure, yeah.
And more than anything, you're growing, right? You're learning and growing, because if all you do is record yourself, that's easy.
Right.
Once you get, I know how to set this compressor or set this, mic or level, whatever you're using. But when somebody else comes in, they sound totally different. And the mic you have may not even work for them as well. I mean, you capture them. But so the more people you can record, the more groups you can record and have that frustration of minimal tools, you figure out ways to do things better, you know, and then really what happens is you figure out a way to buy more stuff, you know,
Right.
you know, that's what happens. So it's like, you know, there's not much time in that frustration level that you're either going to give up or you're going to buy something or you're just going to go to a studio and record,
Right.
you know, just because you just aren't able to, you know, get what you want out of it. So there's a lot of variables like that.
So we have a lot of props and microphones to talk about, but you know what? At this time, why don't we? This is a good time to take a pause. And you have an online course that you've created, right?
Yep.
And so, can you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. It took about a year for the whole thing to develop. So last fall, I sent out a newsletter and had a bunch of items of things that I've been working on and had done previously, a few months previous to that. And somebody contacted me that got the newsletter, who was on, you know, the list, somebody I had never met, and they were from Italy, and they said, we have this subscription service, and we have all these subscribers, and they're largely classical-based instruction, like lessons for piano players, lessons for violinists, but we don't have anything on recording. Would you be interested? You know, and they saw that I was an educator, so that's kind of what drew him to.
Okay.
One of the posts was that I'm teaching, you know, and he said, would you be able to design a course that would help classical musicians learn how to record at home?
Okay.
And this was pre-pandemic. This had nothing to do with that, because
Right.
this was last fall.
Sure.
So I said, sure, not knowing how much effort that was going to be. You know, like when he finally said, you know, can you do this? And I was like, yeah, I can do this. And then I went to like sit down and try to break down a course, you know, into modules. And the thing is that these potential buyers of the course are low level, like non-technical. They're musicians that don't know anything about recording.
Okay.
So that was the premise, kind of like what we're talking about,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
But with the classical music focus. So I had to always retain that objective, because, you know, I can quickly like skip over things that are just no big deal to me, but I don't want to lose someone that doesn't know what I'm talking about. And I'm familiar with that in my classes, because I've learned how to understand where, you know, how to bridge that gap and make sure that I'm not like overstepping something that somebody doesn't know. So I sat down and I plotted everything out, and then I was like, we kicked it back and forth, and finally we agreed on the curriculum. And then when I went to shoot it, I was like, oh, I need a graphic here. Oh, I need to show how I do this. Oh, I need to talk about digital audio. And it was just, it took forever.
Right.
And there were rewrites and test shoots and stuff. And finally, you know, and I kept promising I was working on it. You know, they were getting a little, they were cool about it, but they were really excited about this product coming out, because they said, this will be our best seller ever. You know, it's like, they were just really excited about it. And I was too. It's just that it was like, you know, I had like a huge list of things in my notes that I had to do. And it turned out, the course turned out to be 100 minutes long between 8 different modules.
Okay.
So there's a lot there, but it covers everything from, I mean, it's very beginner and walks you through every step of recording and mixing. And it talks about interfaces.
Sure.
It talks about, you know, the equipment that you need, the basic equipment. And
so it's certainly more advanced than some of the things that we're talking about here, right?
Right.
We're kind of
but
starting
it really keeps it on a basic level. And there's some examples. I had a violin player come in and we did different miking. And so the course has listening examples that are included with that about the different, there's like 3 mic positioning topics that we talk about, like, the space pair and, you know, 2 mics in the front, and, you know, so there's, or just one single mono mic. So I compared the 3 different miking techniques. You can listen to it. We talk about the benefits of it, the downside of some of those. And so I think that that's helpful to musicians that are just trying to capture their violin part or record their piano part. You know, maybe they have a piano at home and they're trying to record it. And so it's very helpful for that. And,
well, I tell you, not only for musicians, but also filmmakers too. I mean, we have to record video. You know, we put a lot of time and consideration into, you know, how we're going to capture audio. Right. And, you know, with video production, everyone is always focusing on the video and the quality of the video and the lenses you're going to use. And inevitably, everyone's first short film or video, maybe it does look beautiful, but the audio is always the most challenging bit. And it's one thing for people coming up in video production and even film is to give it its consideration, give it its fair time with as you're learning about cameras and lenses and shutter speeds and frames per second. Take some of that time and dedicate it to learning audio, because you know, the one interesting thing is when you're watching a film, if the quality of the image is not so great, you could almost handle it. But if the audio quality is bad, you will,
especially with headphones,
people will not watch the film.
Yeah,
and so
I've had a couple of student films that like, hey, check out my film, and I'm like, great, and I look at it and I was like, oh, it's pretty good, and then it's like, but I'm listening with headphones, and you just hear like weird things that, you know, distract you from the movie. You know,
and it gives fatigue.
Right.
And it's something, and it's sometimes even on a subconscious level that I want to switch off. I don't want to watch this.
Well, it probably bothers me more than the average person, you know.
Yeah,
but the tools now, they're affordable, they're very useful. I mean, you can get such a better product now, audio wise,
sure,
by just knowing a little bit. So you know, like just someone you know watching this course would learn a lot about things that be like, oh, okay, that'll work for, even if you're trying to record your recital. Mm-hmm. You know, a lot of people need to, you know, they're capturing it because they've worked so hard at getting ready for this recital, portfolio piece, whatever they're doing. Or they write a piece, they compose a piece that gets performed, right, at the end of some cycle of instruction, and they want to capture that. So that's really where people that have no idea how to record want to know, how do I do this? And and you know, I've gotten hired to do it because some people just can't be bothered figuring it out. They don't want to bother. They go, how much would that cost? Okay. And they would rather just pay someone that knows what they're doing because they're so frazzled about everything about the production.
Yeah.
But, you know, eventually it's something that anyone can do, and it's fairly affordable, and then you just get better at it. You know, so it's definitely something I recommend that all musicians know how to record themselves.
Right.
I mean, that's always been, you know, not just because I have a course about it, but I told this person, this rep that we talked, I said, I think that's a great idea that you're offering this to these musicians, because I think every musician, you know, especially if you're being a professional musician, needs to capture something for an audition, especially now, you know, you can't go to audition for somebody, but you can, if you could record yourself at home, perform your piece, or give them your, you know, or do on a Zoom interview, give them good audio, there's more of a chance that you can get the gig.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and it's not because they're like, oh, that person didn't know how to record themselves, but it's about the emotion, right? You can get this the emotion of your performance across because it's enveloping them. They don't have to like cringe about, you know, like the distortion. You know, like if you were distorting through that input, it would just be. They would just say, how long is this? When is this going to be over? You know, like that's, you know, they just say, okay, and then they'll go to the next person. So you might have been a great performer, but that audio quality hindered their impression of you.
Right. I mean, someone also, they might watch a video and say, hey, how did you like the video? Oh, I don't like it. But it registers on a subconscious level.
Right.
Why don't you like it? You know, they might not even realize the reason why they didn't like that video was because of the audio. It's not something that they might be able to articulate, but it registers on a subconscious level. And so that's why it's critically important. Now, there's a lot of, you know, I work and interact with a lot of actors that are, and actresses that are going on auditions, and they're doing video auditions.
Right.
Same type of thing.
Right.
Take some consideration on your video audition to get some clean, good audio. It makes a difference.
So even, you know, nowadays we're seeing a lot of like news interviews and stuff, you know, like CNN, and people are being interviewed left and right for whatever reason. And there's so many this bothers me a little bit. You hear somebody, and everyone's at home, they're dressed up nice, and they're like, oh, I'm going to be on CNN, I'm going to dress up.
Sure.
And then you listen to them, and you're like,
yeah,
where are you in the bathroom? So the ambient noise is distracting, especially when you have like a panel of people.
Yeah.
And some people are actually in a real TV studio,
right,
and then you go to the guy that's sitting in his bathroom doing his interview. It's the ambient differences is really annoying.
Yeah.
And because I do a lot of on-camera Zoom type of things, what I always I've gone through trying to figure out what works, and convenience of just using your laptop mic is okay, but
right.
It wasn't. I could tell. I've listened to some of those classes that got captured by Berklee or whatever, and I was like, I'm just not happy with that. Doesn't sound good, right? So every time I do a Zoom session now, I just use a dynamic microphone into my interface into the computer.
Oh, okay.
So the fact that I have that 2-channel interface, I don't do a lot of recording with it because I have a studio, but
sure.
I use that only, and it's always in my bag. So if I'm at home or at the studio to do a Zoom session, I have consistent sound, and it's clean. And even the other day, I was on a Zoom chat with the music department at Bridgewater, and my supervisor said, why does Tony always have the good sounding microphone? And, because there's all these other instructors that were on whatever,
right, sure.
and they were, a lot of ambience. And
yeah, no,
so even
absolutely.
when you're doing a lot of that Zoom stuff, even if it's interviews, or just meetings, I think it helps to make you sound, to have that focus on your voice and not so much the sound of the room, that hollowness. Yeah. Like, it would just sound completely different.
And, and we've been showing, I think I've been cutting to a screen that shows the Focusrite Scarlett series, but there's a whole host of interfaces available.
Sure.
We've kind of flashed one product online, but there's many other interfaces that are good.
Yeah, and there's, they go from $150 to, I have I have a 16-channel interface that was like $3,000, so that's not what people are going to buy for that many inputs.
So that's a good point. So if you're doing online courses or instruction or a webinar, it's one thing if you're, just asking a question as a participant, but if you're an instructor,
right.
Or you're giving an important meeting, these little changes can make a difference. So your course, we're going to put the link to your course below. The title of your course it says for the classical musician.
Right.
But I think you were telling me that it's applicable to really you're covering all the topics, right?
The reason why it's called that is their subscription service is focused around classical musicians.
Okay.
Like they have piano lessons. I think they have piano, violin, trumpet, maybe cello, and they have like some teachers that talk about conducting.
Sure.
Some that talk about improvisation. And they're all very kind of classical focused. So even though that's the name of the course, because obviously their 1,200 subscribers would go, oh, let me look at that. But it's really, I thought they may abandon that classical musician thing, but no, I'm glad that they kept it because that was my focus, because I used the violin player as an example, but it doesn't matter. It's home recording. Right. For anyone.
Sure.
But I don't think they wanted to say home recording for everyone. So, but it is a very useful course for anyone who's trying to mess around at home and like, why is this not sounding right? I bought a few things. Why is this not working? So it's not only about the gear, but it's also about the process of recording and how to edit. And, they wanted me to make sure that I talked about, so because you have limited, if you're using Audacity, which is that's the program that's used in the whole course.
Right.
So you can use Audacity. Everything I show is in Audacity, so it's very functional with that. But a lot of times, like if you're a violin player, you'll play a couple takes, and you'll say, okay, I like the part of this and I like the part of that.
Right.
So I talk about how to edit the first and the second takes together.
How to put them together.
Yeah, and because that's a useful thing for people that are playing a solo instrument. And whether you're a piano player, solo, anything. So I talk about, and that's what I did, is I did multiple takes with this violinist that came in one day. and I shot a couple different takes with different miking techniques, and then I took 2 of the same miking technique because I couldn't use 2 different microphone setups. You know, and you're not usually going to do that, but I was doing it for examples. But I took 2 takes of the same microphone setup, and I showed how I took this half and then this half.
That's great.
And we cut them
That's
together.
really helpful.
Not that there was anything wrong with that, but I
Right.
was just doing it as an example.
Right, yeah.
To show, okay, how would you decide, you know, you line them up and you cut and you place it up together and then you merge them together, and then you once you edited your take, then you go into the mix mode of, okay, now I'm going to process this sound file with various things to get the levels sounding right and,
Sure.
and EQ and whatever you want to do.
Right.
So it talks about the mixing process and okay, now that I've got this song done, what do I do? What are the file formats that I should
Sure.
export to and
Right,
that kind of
right.
thing. So
Yeah.
file formats, you know, everyone's familiar with MP3s. The problem that I find with MP3s is people, like, MP3 is meant to be a final destination,
Sure.
right?
Yeah,
It's not
compressed.
like once you've created an MP3, all you should be doing is listening to it,
Right. Yeah.
and as a convenience,
Mm-hmm.
so you can have 1,000 songs on your phone.
So it's very similar to video in that way. When we're creating a video, we might be recording raw or what equivalent of WAV or
Yeah.
a very high resolution file. But then at the end, we're rendering it such that it's compressed using hopefully a very solid compression method that doesn't
Yep.
impact the quality of the video too much. But same thing with music. Same scenario here. When you're compressing a WAV file to an MP3, you're giving up something,
Right.
and you, right.
So at that point, you can't take the MP3 and bring it into a recording project to
Sure.
use as your music base, which happens quite a bit. Some of my hip hop clients, they come in to do vocals. They say, "Oh, we're going to bring the music in." Okay, so they give me the music file, and it's an MP3.
Right.
And I was like, "Is this all you got?" Because it'll work, but as soon as you start messing with it in some ways within the project, like, can we make this a little slower? And you're like, well, normally you could, but as soon as I do that, you're going to have artifacts in the file because there's a lot of stuff missing. And when you try to compact it or open it up, the data that's missing becomes very
Right.
revealing,
Sure.
because it's like it'll become really weird sounding. So you want to use a good quality file to bring into the project. If you're going to sing to a music bed, make sure that it's a good quality file so that you don't lose
Yeah.
quality from that point.
So all of this is you're covering all of this in your course,
Yep.
and it's what $59 for the whole course? Or is
Yeah,
it
I think
just
they're
one
right. It's $59
That's it?
for the whole.
for the entire course.
Yep, for all 8 modules.
I thought it was almost just $59 for each module. It's $59 for the entire course. That's
Yep,
great.
I think they might be offering certain sections that you want to buy, but it's
Yeah.
but I guess they're offering the whole thing for $59 for the whole course.
Yep, that's great. That's
One
great.
time thing, and so it's like basically purchasing a lesson.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, I mean, a 1 hour lesson for $60, and that's just a lesson. This is something that you
Right, and you can play it. You
can
replay it.
skip
Yeah,
around,
right. Phenomenal.
and some people may not need every chapter, or maybe they want to skip to certain chapters first and go back,
Right,
and so
right.
it's
and with your experience and dealing with all different clients, then and from knowing you, I know that you go at a pace where the point of view is you don't have to come into it as an expert audio engineer. Someone's going to walk you through.
Yeah.
So
No, it's definitely, I
great.
kept it very understandable. And one good thing about the course too, and I do this in some of my classes, is there's an experiment in one of the modules where you become familiar with your environment. How does your environment sound? How does your bedroom sound? How does your kitchen sound?
Yeah.
And there's an experiment to kind of figure out what the different rooms in your house sound like on their own. So when you're recording in a room and it's got the sound of the room, because you're going to sometimes can't avoid that,
Right.
it's best to record in a room that sounds better than some other room. So
Yeah. Yeah.
so there's an experiment where I have them, learn how to capture the sound of each room and then compare that, and then they go, "Oh wow, I didn't know that
Sure.
storage room downstairs in the basement has a really good, like who would have thought,
Right.
So to have those experiments done and then become familiar with what room would be more ideal, given the fact that you're in a home environment or in an apartment that might have limitations. So it's really helpful for that.
So what you talk in your course and some of the things that we're not going to talk about now is even the next level and beyond that. But, again, we talked about interfaces. We've talked about connecting to your computer, using some software. Of course, it can go on and on. Buying mixing boards, and mixing boards have interfaces and different types of preamplifiers. There's compression and analog compression and a whole host of, other information to know as you get more advanced with recording. Some of it you can get in your course. We might touch upon it a little bit because we brought, I have a little bag of goodies over here. You have some stuff. So we'll talk a little bit about it. But of course, just to know that there's a lot more to go as you go advanced. And for instance, in your studio, you're having consoles and mixing boards and compressors and amplifiers, preamplifiers, your miking amps. You have
the thing that's really popular, the thing that's popular now is you have to decide what you're not going to get, right? You have to draw a line at some point. Most people are not going to buy what I bought,
right?
Because they're not going to do this for a living. So what's really common now is if people buy a little setup, they do a majority of their composing and format the song, all these things that they can do at home, and then at some point, like maybe they can't mic a drum kit at home.
Sure.
Like even if they had the mics, maybe they can't do that because of loudness, right? Or just they don't know what they're doing or whatever. So what's really happening now is when I get projects in the studio, the client has already done something at home and they've taken it as far as they can take it, and then at some point you may have to just go to a studio for a couple hours to just finish something off, bring it back home to finish the final thing. But things like tracking loud instruments, they're really not going to do that at home as often unless you have a house that's like separated from other people, other neighbors, in a basement, and you fix a room up that's fairly isolated.
Right.
A lot of people don't have that capability because then you're going to have a bigger interface. Then you will have to have a mixer. Then you will have to have more microphones.
Absolutely.
So what's happening is that a lot of my clients do a lot of work at home. I might give them lessons on how to use their tools.
And you do that, right? So if someone wants to contact you for kind of one-on-one tutorials, lessons, stuff like that.
Yeah, or just recommending, I do some consulting where somebody's like, okay, I need to get some equipment. What should I get?
Right.
And I'll say, okay, well, what are you trying to record?
Well, you've helped me out a whole bunch of times.
So, I help them make decisions about I help them draw that line.
Sure.
Because, it gets very quickly. I have a friend who's building a studio right now in west of Worcester, but it's going to be a really nice studio, but it's going to be a lot of money.
Sure.
It's the building, it's going to cost a lot of money. Then he's going to have to buy equipment and wiring. So it's just, some people don't want to go through that, and it's not really for everyone. I've done it, and, had I known how much, not at this particular space that I'm in now, because it was a studio when I moved in, so I didn't have to start from scratch. But I had a 5-year time, in downtown Boston where I had to build the studio from nothing into a big open loft space, and it gets really expensive. And that money that you put into construction takes a long time to make back. Right. So for most people, it's not worth it.
Most people, it's not worth it. But and that's why they go to a studio. That's why they come to your place. And it's good to do as much as you can at home. So if you're a musician, even if the recording is not going to sound great, do it anyway because it's practice. Because when you come into the studio, you want to be efficient with your time. You want to kind of know you want to come in there armed with as much knowledge about your music that you want to record before getting into the studio. And so
the parts have to be worked out. You have to be comfortable.
That's right.
Because, when I'm recording, I don't think about, oh my God, I'm recording. I don't get nervous about it. It's called that red light fear. When people see the red light, they just freeze up, and they kind of like, well, why are you not playing that right anymore? As soon as you hit record, it's like they change. So if you're comfortable with recording because you do it so much at home, it's like practicing your instrument.
So, I would even go so far as even if that the drum tracks that you're recording You're not going to get the sound you want until you get to into a studio. Do it anyway. Record it at home anyway.
Right.
Do the best that you can, because then when you do go into the studio, you're going to be that much more efficient with your time.
Right.
And
the only thing I would say with that situation is if you're doing that at home, the thing you want to try to do if humanly possible is to record to a click track.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Right. Well, I mean,
because some people don't know about that, and if you
let's tell the audience what a click track is.
So a click track is just nothing more than setting the tempo of the song. Even if you're just doing it without a program that's clicking, just record a metronome onto one track, and know this is the tempo. Oh, it's 100 beats per minute. Just record 5 minutes of that, and you need to follow that as you're playing. And that way, when you bring that to the studio, you've got a marker to start with, and you have a reference of tempo, so that when you start dealing with, maybe you want to add some MIDI tracks, program tracks, or sample loops and things, those will line up because you have this initial reference. So if you're going to record at home, knowing you're going to go somewhere, totally try to have a click track.
Right.
Because that is so much more helpful to go into that next step. If you know you're going to go to the next level, you want to do that.
Right, because you might be comfortable with your quality wave file of your vocals, and know that some other instrument just doesn't sound right in your home.
Right. Some tracks are kept.
Right, and so, it's very easy as a musician, and when you're playing live and friends, if you're not right on beat. But if you are right on beat, the benefit is when they go in to record, and someone like you is an audio engineer and is doing a lot of post-production, and maybe you're helping out, maybe you're putting bass, and you play.
I mean, we did a project with that where you just gave me a raw track of somebody playing live to a click, and I built stuff because you gave me the click. I was able to play a drum and bass track to something that didn't have drums and bass.
Because it's very easy to just go slightly off tempo. And of course, the audience would never know it because it's a little bit organic in a way sometimes. But again, when you're putting it into a computer, not that everything has to be precise, but it is easier when you're starting to add different elements to the mix. So I think that's a click track. Now, click track again, it's just a metronome. It's just it'll beat on time. Some people have a hard time singing or performing to that. The other thing that you can do is if you have a kind of a MIDI file of drums that are on tempo, and that's a little bit easier, then you can do that as well. But it's just something that is consistently
on. If you have a program like Logic or any of the programs that have instruments in them, it's always best to play to a groove than a simple click.
Right.
For anyone. But you want to make sure that groove is accurate to what you're trying to, So a groove is always a good thing to play to, and that's what I will do. Is I'll just set up a loop and have a kick, snare, and hi-hat pattern, because then I can feel the pulse of the song. And then you're laying down a bass part, you're laying down a guitar part and vocal part. You just feel the groove a lot better. So that's definitely playing to a loop is easier than playing to a click. Some people get too frustrated with the click and they don't play to a click because they aren't successful with it.
Some of the clicks are just jarring. It's like, right in your ear. It's
no, it's definitely not something that is easy to get used to if you've not, like when I bring a band into the studio, one of the first things I ask them is, are we going to play to a click track?
Who in the studio?
Any band that would come in, right? So we're gonna build a band project up, where the band comes in and we're recording, and the first question I would ask would be, are we going to play to a click track? And if they say, what's a click track? Then I say, never mind, and we'll just record it live and hope they don't have any MIDI production later on. And typically they don't, because they're used to playing live, and they, so there are some projects that I just did an album. It's a blues project, and we didn't use a click track at all. The drummer played it. We just played it organically. And it worked out for them because they're a band.
Yeah. All right. So I brought some props, goodies, or professional equipment, however you want to put it. You have some stuff as well, but I thought I would start with what your kind of recommendation is a condenser mic as being one of your first mics, and this is a condenser mic. Can you tell me a little? Are you familiar with this mic?
I know the company, but so this microphone has everything I would want I'm not sure how much these are, but do you know how much these cost?
I think it's, maybe a couple $100.
Okay, so like 400 or 500 maybe.
Yeah, maybe around 3. Yeah, somewhere around there, a lot under 400.
So the thing about this is, got the switches we want. We have the polar pattern switch.
Okay.
So we can switch between omni, which is everywhere, cardioid, which is typically what most microphones pick up, and then we do have the bidirectional choice. So if I flip that in bidirectional, I can sing or play into it, and then all the noise in the room gets canceled out because it goes into both sides.
Sure. Yeah. We use this mic. A great band came by a couple weeks ago called Palmera. If you haven't seen the video on Video Creators Lounge YouTube channel, you should check them out. They're a great band. We use that because they, 3 singers, and they just kind of were all around the microphone, and
Right.
it worked out okay. It worked out well. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, that's really, between that and then this has a low cut switch. So if you are getting too much low end and you want to cut that, sometimes when you get close to the mic, you get what's called proximity effect, and it's a low end boost. So by just notching that out, you can be close to the mic but not have that big boominess that happens. DJs would want that, but a normal singer may not want that.
Right. So, what is the front of the microphone on this microphone?
So, first of all,
Because you have to, pay attention to the
okay,
the
so
pattern, right?
No,
So-
you're right, because I've seen this in commercials where they're singing into the mic the wrong way.
Right.
So like they're holding the
yeah.
mic and singing. That's not where the mic is
Sure.
picking up. The mic is picking up on here, and if you
Mm-hmm.
look at it, there's a little capsule about the size of a quarter, and you can see there's a little circle in there, and that's the diaphragm. Mm-hmm. So this would be called a large diaphragm condenser mic because it's got a larger
Right.
pickup.
So I think I had to look it up. The front of the mic is where the label is.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because you would think
You
if
always
I-
face that's the thing. When you don't know. Well, first of all, if you don't know, it's probably the side with the label of the company.
Sure.
And if you don't know, then just put it in bidirectional, and it doesn't matter. So, like I tell some students, like if you're at a studio and you're putting up a microphone and you don't know how the mic is positioned, just put it in bidirectional, and it won't matter
Sure.
if you're screwing up.
Sure.
They may be singing to the back of the mic, but it's equally sensitive on both sides.
Well,
But
it's a little counterintuitive to me when I started using this mic because you would think as a video guy that the singer, if someone's being recorded, singing, and that you would want their branding to be up front so other people could see, what type of microphone
it's
is
exact
this?
opposite.
Right. And so no, in this case, and I think that's pretty true to a lot of
Yep.
microphones. In this case, the branding, the label actually is typically facing towards you, and you know that that's the front of the condenser mic. And the reason why you need to know is because there's different patterns, and depending which pattern you select, you want to be sure.
Right. So you think of it as a
direction it is.
video
Right.
branding thing, but it's the singer who they're branding to,
Right.
right? Like the engineer knows.
This is a Sennheiser, right? Yes.
No, that is SE Electronics. That's the name of the company. Yeah.
Electronics.
But I mean that's a known brand. I've heard of those guys before. They definitely have good mics.
All right. So this is you're familiar with this mic.
Yeah, this
I
is
know.
the SM7B.
Yeah.
I have a couple of these. I just bought them. I've been wanting them for a while, but I bought a couple in January, and I have one at home and one at the studio. And this is the mic I use for my Zoom sessions.
Right. Yeah.
So-
So this is a condenser mic.
No, it's a dynamic mic.
Oh, like the RE20. Right.
Definitely. So it's a dynamic mic. However, this has got a funky little clip on it, right? So
Right.
that the mic has this wire, and you
Right.
plug the mic in with this little thing here. The thing that's really great about this is this is one of the only dynamic mics that I have and have seen. I'm sure there's some that are out there, but this is the only dynamic mic that I have that has the low cut switch on it.
Sure. Yeah.
Whereas most dynamic mics do not have that. That has one. The RE20 has a
Right,
switch, but
right.
but so that and this, because this is meant for a lot of dialogue, right? So the proximity effect thing could be offset with these low cut switches.
Sure.
But this is a great mic. This is a $400 mic, but it comes with its own windscreen. It has this little, you're not plugging right into the mic from the back, so you don't really see
Right. It's clean. It's clean on camera too.
Exactly. So they use it because you can clip it.
Sure.
And then you can do that. But it's just a really great overall mic. So
sure. Yeah, I misspoke. It's a dynamic mic.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, this is similar price point between the RE20 and the Shure SMB.
But this mic here,
I like this one because I feel like it's a little bit more full.
Yeah, it's meant for low end. This is actually a good mic for a kick drum.
Sure. Yeah.
And one thing that you notice on these mics that one doesn't have is this venting going on.
Right.
So the reason for that is that it's good for a lot of air pressure to pass through the mic without blowing it out. So if you put that on a kick drum has a lot of air coming out of it when you hit it.
Right.
So it captures low end well, and it allows the air to pass through it. So it's kind of like a wind tunnel thing. And there's another mic that I have called a D112, which looks like an egg shape, and it's got the vents on it as well. So it allows the air to pass through and not blow the diaphragm because of this really tight air pressure.
You know, the one thing that we didn't talk about when we spoke about condenser mics is that a condenser mic will need something called phantom power, right? Now, it's not a non-issue, especially if you're using an interface. Most all interfaces have phantom power.
Yep.
And, you know, how would you describe phantom power?
Well, you have to back up a little bit and say, well, why do we need phantom power? So dynamic mics don't need phantom power. Condenser mics do. The reason why is because it's how they pick up the sound. These are called electromagnetic induction. They use a magnet inside. So all dynamic mics use a magnet, whether it's moving coil like these are, or like you mentioned, the ribbon mics. Those are in the same category, but those are very delicate. They're more pricey.
Sure.
Probably wouldn't recommend that. They're really good mics. I mean, there's Royer, for instance, makes some really good ribbon mics, but they're like $1,200 for a mic. So you're probably not going to get to that for a while. So those are a certain category. The condenser category has a different way of capturing the sound. It has like this charged back plate, and the diaphragm kind of moves front and back and forth, in relation to that. And the impulses of that kind of charged back plate have a very low voltage.
Sure.
So every condenser mic, and this freaked me out when I first heard about it, every condenser mic has to have a little preamp built into it. A little chip that's the preamp to give it the gain that it needs to become mic level, which is actually a very low millivolt level. But in order for a condenser mic to actually have enough output to be usable, it needs to have a preamp in it.
Sure.
And that preamp needs power,
and that's
a little bit of voltage, which is 48 volts. It's supplied by the mixer or the interface.
Right, yeah.
And it travels up the wire, and that's how it works.
Sure.
So when you plug in, so the thing about a condenser mic you have to be careful of is, you want to make sure the gain is turned down when you turn the power on, because otherwise you'll have this little pop, and it could blow speakers, it could damage your hearing, whatever. And you never want to unplug a mic while it's live, because it'll do the same thing. You'll pop, or you could blow a tweeter.
Someone came by the other day, and I didn't have the mixing board set up yet, and I think it might have even been Raj. He came by the other day, and he just immediately put the headphones on. I said, don't put those headphones on. I said, don't trust me.
Right.
And I'm pretty careful
about
that.
That's the last thing you do is
don't trust anybody. Keep the headphones off of your ear until the audio engineer or the sound person is finished doing what they say, and they tell you to put the headphones on, because, not that the headphones could do permanent damage, but I'll tell you, it could really blast you out.
It could be really loud. And
so that's a night, again, if you're a musician, if you're a singer, and you're wearing headphones, just keep them off your ears until you feel confident that the audio engineer or whatever they're doing back there, that they're looking like they're ready to go.
Especially if you're the audio engineer.
Yeah, right. Sometimes you put your own headphones on as the audio engineer.
But I mean, you're like, you're like not sure what you're doing, and you got the headphones on. So I always tell people in the studio, like the drummer, if I'm doing a drum session, I go, these are your headphones, don't put them on until I tell you.
Right. Yeah.
And that way I say, just play, warm up. I let the drummer play. I make sure all the mics are being picked up. I get a decent balance. Then I say, okay, you can put your headphones on now. And then maybe we start doing the click track, or we start playing whatever. So, and I learned that at Berklee, because with student sessions, they don't really, you're using a big board for the first time.
Right.
And,
everything's up all the way.
You get feedback loops, bussing things going around. And there's a lot of, when you use a mixer, there's a lot more option for feeding something back into another bus. And, I call that the big noise. Mm-hmm. And it's not pleasant when you have headphones on when somebody makes the big noise, because it's almost like knitting needles in your eardrums, and it could damage your hearing permanently. Really, I mean,
could it just one time, huh?
It could. You could do some damage. It's that transient can blow your eardrum, because it's air pressure, and then we're not, I mean, it's just, especially as an audio engineer, I do not want to have any mishaps with my hearing, because that could be avoided. Any mishaps.
What?
Yeah.
So,
but because I've been to loud concerts without earplugs when I was younger, not many of them, but I was 3 days later, your ears are still not quite what that I went to
less of that now, but I swear, in the 80s, the volume in general. The volume at concerts was higher, I feel like, in the 80s than it
depends on the venue,
90s.
But now, especially with the outdoor concerts, which aren't happening at the moment, but some cities have, for outdoor concerts like Foxborough or Great Woods, they have ordinances of loudness. So that's more for the people that aren't at the concert.
Right.
Of anything. So
phantom power is no big deal. If you have a condenser mic, there's usually a switch on your interface or a mixing board that just says, I want to enable phantom power. And it's just that if you plug a condenser mic in the mixing board and you're not hearing anything, all right, you have to enable the phantom power. Now, this might be a little bit too detailed, but this is a cloud lifter, which can actually take a dynamic microphone, and you plug the XLR in one end and plug the other end into your mixing board, and you can actually send phantom power to this to give this type of microphone a little bit of a boost. Now, in a studio setting, you don't use these because you have separate preamps, and you don't need to boost it anymore. I do it because I don't have a separate preamp. The preamp on my mixing board is just not powerful enough all the time, so this gives it a little bit of a boost. But just enough to...
Right, so, but that's not related to phantom power as much as it's just what it is that's a transformer, and it takes a level and makes the level stronger. It's like a mini gain stage.
Sure.
So that's not related to phantom power, that box there. It's about taking this level and just giving it a little lift in power, right? And that gives you a little bit more gain output.
But it does require phantom power to operate. So it leverages some type of phantom power.
Right, so the phantom power...
The voltage. It leverages the voltage.
So that box needs phantom power like a mic. It's not supplying phantom power to the mic. That's what I want to clarify.
Yeah, absolutely.
But instead of having a battery... So the thing about phantom power, we've all had little microphones over the years that had whether those little tiny little AAAs or whatever, or a watch battery, that you turn on off switch, that is a condenser mic that's using a battery, because you're plugging into an 1/8" jack or something that can't supply phantom power.
Sure.
The downside about a mic with a battery is that the battery dies, and you might be in the middle of a recording and the battery starts to... That has happened to me. In my early days, when I had two of these little pencil mics that were from a boom box, and I'm doing a recording, and I hear one of the mics just
slowly fade away.
And I had to, finagle the recording, so it was a stereo recording throughout, even though I kind of had to copy and paste some stuff. But yeah, so there's a lot of things like that batteries are not good for that, but phantom power keeps a consistent power throughout.
So I figured I'd just show this as well. For doing a lot of video and film, there are preamps that you can buy to use with your camera. Now, a lot of people can plug microphones directly into the camera. Right. There's that little, 3.5 millimeter you plug in for lavaliers and whatnot. And but sometimes, well, first of all, this is a preamp that is separate, and sometimes it's helpful because it has an XLR input. It does have a battery to supply phantom power in the off chance that you're using a condenser mic in the field, which is probably less likely. But it also has an amp, a preamp in it, so you can kind of adjust the volume levels. And what you're doing is you're not maxing out the preamp that's in your camera. So when you're on your camera and you're adjusting the audio levels, and it's not loud enough, I need to turn it up. Sometimes, if you've got it all the way up or close to that, it's not, you get a little bit of distortion at the very upper end. If you have to turn it up to 10, right, then you might start getting a little distortion.
And noise just from that process,
Noise, right. Okay.
Yeah.
So
noise and distortion, or 1 or 2 or whatever. So
Yeah. So this has been helpful for me anyway, when doing some filming, is that, I can adjust the levels here, and then I'm not stressing out the preamp on my camera, as well as it gives a lot of different options for, inputs. There's a couple other inputs as well. This is a Beach Tech and preamp for a camera. The other interesting thing too is that there's an XLR input, so a microphone input that you can put in here. And one thing that I typically do is, because it will come out to my camera in 2 channels, left and right, I will set one of the audio channels low purposefully, one of them a little bit higher, just in that rare case that someone is extremely loud and it gets too loud and it starts clipping. And it's what happens when something is beyond the threshold of what you're trying to record. I could always switch to that other track in post-production, and I'll have a clean, Of course, now there's there's audio recorders like Zoom recorder as well. I mean, this is a very consumer grade.
Right.
People use this.
But I've done video shoots with that where I was using a device like that. It wasn't my device. It was, the video producer had that, and I was in charge of, walking. Actually, there was a shoot I did a year or so ago that was in 360.
Sure.
And so Zoom has a 360 device. It's like $250, and you can record in complete surround. And we were using a 360 camera.
Yeah.
So
that's cool.
But all I had to do, I just took this little device, which it could fit in my pocket.
Sure.
It was a rounder one than that, but it had 4 microphones, right? But it had 4 mics, and I would just sit it down on a table.
Yeah.
And walk away.
Yeah, that's great.
And that was my job that day. That was the easiest gig I've ever had. Probably had, I had 360 sound, but all I had to do was put this device on the table, hit record, walk away.
Right.
When the scene was over, I walked and turned it off, and it was such an easy gig as far as lack of gear. I'm used to having all this stuff that you bring,
right.
And now you can just bring that.
Right.
Those are decent for video recording, but when you're talking about the preamp, when I'm recording video in my studio. And I A/B'd this. I did a test before I was kind of testing audio for my video course. I went into the camera. So basically I had the mic on the camera just to capture the sound, just overall sound. Then I had a mic, an SM7B next to me, and I recorded that into the camera. Then I did the same thing, and I recorded it into my computer with my interface, my studio interface, a good one.
Yeah.
And it totally blew it away. So luckily, because I was on site at a studio, I was able to record. I recorded from the camera so it could hear me as a reference.
Sure.
And I would do a slate.
Yeah.
Right. I would just clap.
Yeah.
And I would go blah blah blah. Take 1. And I would clap, and then that mic picked me up.
Right.
And this mic is picking me up.
Yeah.
That's being recorded. And then I took the computer. Once I fed everything in, I took the computer audio and lined it up with the original from the camera and muted that, and all of a sudden I had really good audio.
Yeah.
So I did some tests before
Yeah.
I actually decided on how was I going to capture the sound, because I was going to have 100 minutes of dialogue. That's what I ended up with, but I did 3 takes of every module to make sure that if I said something wrong, I wouldn't have probably made that same mistake in another take, and I was able to duplicate that. So I sat there one full day practically not moving in the chair, you know, so I could edit better and in case I, you know,
right. Yeah.
but yeah, so it's good to just do some tests and see what you like before you're really committing to doing your final take.
Testing
you know?
is always. Yeah. And so this is a consumer model, but there are versions of, you know, these types of recorders that are, you know, upwards of thousands and thousands of dollars. And, you know, the difference is they have built-in compression, they have built-in kind of limiters and hard limiters and all of these things that, you know, I wouldn't say dummy proof because you need to know what you're doing when you operate it, but it certainly would protect you. So if you're, you know, on a, you know, doing a film with Martin Scorsese, right, you don't want to mess up the audio.
Right.
And so there's all of these things in place to really ensure that
and those are used a lot for, you know, when people want to record their band at a gig or something, people are using that. And, you know, that's just a really good live thing.
What is this thing? Here's a microphone. What is this? What is this?
That's just a windscreen, which
it's like a gerbil.
These are windscreens, but they're for, you know, we're using these windscreens for voice.
Right.
When you're outside doing a shoot, the wind hitting that diaphragm is going to make that really bad sound.
Yeah.
And that will break up. It's basically a diffuser. It breaks up the wind, keeps it from hitting the microphone, but sound, you know, those aren't really hindering the sound at all. If it hinders anything, it might be a little bit of high end, which you really don't need anyway when you're doing a live shoot. You wouldn't mind that being. But if you kept that off and you had wind, that's all you would hear, because those are very sensitive microphones, and a little bit of wind can just out.
So this is a Rode mic that you'd use with a camera. Yep. Very good, very good. And even this has, you know, two channels. It's not a condenser mic; it's a dynamic mic, but you'll still get.
But when you see them doing like the live booms, you know, people holding a boom, they'll have, you know, the shotgun mics, and they'll have a
versions
longer
of this that are 3 times larger.
Yeah, they'll have a longer one, so that microphone, as sensitive as it is, you know, shotgun mics are meant to pick up like a focal point as opposed to something that has to be up close. You know.
What do you got in your bag of tricks? Yeah, anything maybe that we didn't cover?
Just a couple.
He's got
I can reach it without screwing up the mic. Okay, so I'll show you real quickly when I was talking about the two channel interface I'm using.
Yeah.
This is a Focus. It's a Focusrite Forte.
Nice. Let me look.
And so, because it's so small, it has this breakout cable that I plug into the back. So you plug that in, and then this is how you plug in your mics or your line inputs.
Cool.
So it doesn't have much real estate in the back for you know, the actual connection. So you plug in that breakout cable, and then it's got a USB connection. It's got the power.
All right, so this is an audio interface.
Yep.
And it's got a breakout cable for it looks
2 mic and 2 line.
Yeah.
But you can only use 2
I
total.
see. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And it has a software app that is on the computer that I can control. I mean, you can control it here, but it has a software app that I use that can control the levels. It can decide whether I'm using mic or line, and I typically use the software with it so I can see what I'm using. And so that's what I'm using all the time for recording. And then it has, you know, I typically use the headphones, but it has the left and right outs here if you want to plug it into speakers.
Oh, great.
You know,
very good.
Or send it to a mixer or whatever you want to do. But this is what I have in my bag at all times, and just use it for my Zoom sessions and all that. Just got a couple mics, some of which we've already talked about, but like here's a similar mic to. This was the first mic I bought. This first condenser mic I bought,
What do we got here?
which is a AKG 414. It's still a very popular mic. It's got 4 polar patterns on it. One of them is I think it's a hypercardioid, which is just a version of that. Roll-off switch, attenuation. So that's about a $900 mic there.
Now this is a small microphone.
Right.
Is that okay?
Yep. It's really good for vocals. It's good for, you can even use it on I've used it on bass guitars, you know, a little bit off from the amp. It's just a really good all-around mic. And, you know, I mean, it's small and really effective. And this is the ones that you're like, okay, which side is the active side? You know,
You actually use that on an amp as well, huh?
Yeah.
Recording it out.
Yeah, but not real close. Like you know, it can. But see, this has an attenuation switch of -10 and -20. So if you're recording it, you know, if you're fairly close to an amp, you can attenuate it so it's not going to break up. You know, it's not going to distort.
Nice.
So I've got that.
That's nice. I
And
like
then,
that.
The thing that we didn't talk about, which we won't get into, but I'll just show. One thing eventually that you want to get is a couple of DI boxes for direct injection. So these will allow for your guitar to be converted into a XLR, and also one of the main things about it is guitar cables are high impedance, which is restricting the signal. So if you have to have a long guitar cable, I had a student talk about this the other day in class. He has his amp far away from where he's sitting in his basement recording.
Sure.
And having a long guitar cable is a bad idea. So if you have a short cable, then you can run that from the mic out into your mixer. And microphone cables are low impedance. So you can run long runs and not care. So
what about the level? The level of a guitar instrument cable, the decibel level. I mean, it's a little bit lower, or is it really just about the impedance?
Well, it's a different level. Like line level is like 1 volt. Let's say it's 1.228 volts is like but microphone level is millivolts. So what's happening is that it's taking your guitar signal and dumbing it down to a mic level signal, so you can plug into that panel in the room, or you can plug into the stage box, and have good sound, because it also creates a balance signal which cancels noise. So there's a lot of good things that happen with that. That DI box is about $180. There's some that you can buy for like $40-50 that are, you know, Radial makes some decent products that are a little bit more affordable, but do have, you know, higher ranges as well. So that's something that you want to know about and look into at some point when you're serious about keeping the signal clean.
Right. And so you have other ones right now that would allow you, if you play the guitar and you have an amp and you're kind of recording the amp, but you can also take another line out and record it dry, so to speak, right? So
right. Well, what I do with this is I plug the guitar in, and then this is actually going to the mixer directly. So this is my direct signal.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Then I've got this amp out, and I
see.
plug that into the amp, and then I mic the amp. So I've got this direct signal, and then I've got an amp,
Great.
and I mic that.
Right. So then it allows you
to do
for
both.
a lot of people that are playing the guitar, and you know the amp is, you described as part of the chain. We had this conversation before. Sometimes I, and incorrectly probably, have described the amp as like an instrument, but you've in the past have described it more as part of the chain, so to speak. But amps have different sounds, different tones, and guitar players like to, you know, their amp is very, you know, near and dear to their heart necessarily, because it has a certain tone that it brings. So you actually put a microphone in front of the amp to record it. But in some cases, you want to just record the guitar without the amp. And what happens if the amp turns off, or what happens if I think you had a story a while ago about something that happened where, thank goodness, you actually had a clean, dry track, so the guitar plugged directly into the guitar, right into where you were recording it, into the console.
Well, every time I recorded guitar or a bass or an instrument with a pickup, I will use a DI box on that source and go right to the computer, and mic the instrument, mic whatever. But the thing is like I might like the sound of that amp, but I might want to layer a sound with it.
Sure.
So by recording the dry direct performance, I can work with the sound without the person having to come back and re-record it.
Yeah.
So that's very helpful, because there were some instances where we realized that some settings on the amp weren't correct, and we had the performance, so we didn't have to play it again.
Sure.
Then what I do, and this happens a lot, where people track directly. Let's say they can't play an amp at home. They play directly in, maybe don't even have a DI box. They go right in as a guitar into their interface. Very common, but they can't play loud at home, or they don't have an amp. So what they do is they take their tracks and they come to the studio for an hour or two, And then I use something like this called a reamp box.
Mm-hmm.
So what this does is it takes the line level out of the computer, because now your signal out of the interface is not a guitar signal sound level, it's line level, it's stronger, and it's a different impedance and voltage. So you plug that into this box and it dumbs it down to this is the output here, but you can plug in a mic or line, an XLR, a 1/4 inch, into it from your interface. And then the output of that box, you go right into your amp, and your amp thinks you're plugging your guitar in.
Sure. Right.
So what you would do is you could take that previously recorded direct performance and put it through a box and mic a different amp, or mic an amp again because you set something wrong on the amp the day you recorded it.
Sure.
In this case, the person didn't realize that his wah pedal was on.
Yeah.
And
and
when I first started the session, this was the second guitar session, a couple days after the first one. I'm like,
and he was exhausted, right? It was a long day. Wasn't
well,
it?
when he first started, I was like, "Is that the same sound as the other day?" And he's like, "Yeah, I didn't touch the amp because he kept the amp at the studio."
Right.
And I was like, "Okay." And so we did the session, and then 3 or 4 songs into the day, he realized when he went to play a solo that his wah pedal was on the whole time in a static position, causing the sound of the amp to be thinner, which is what I was asking him about during the first song, getting levels, right? And we just went with it, and then I was like, oh, that's why. So because he had recorded everything dry direct, unaffected by the amp, I took the dry direct sounds, ran it through this. After he set his amp up properly, he didn't have to play again. He just sat in the back of the room,
just reamped it.
And I ran all of his tracks through the amp.
And you recorded the amp.
Recorded the amp again with the right sound.
Yeah.
So the fact that I recorded direct, in that case, saved the whole session.
So I mean,
and then this box supplemented.
Anytime if you're recording guitar or any instrument that has an amp and you're recording the amp, to also record a dry track.
And sometimes you can't do that with the 2-channel interface. So that's when you start to hinder. That's when you start to, create limitations for yourself that cannot be fixed because you only have a limited number of inputs.
All right. So for those of you who are watching, if your head is spinning or about to blow up at this point, the other thing that you can do is just call Tony at Big T Productions.
That's what some people do.
And have him do all this stuff for you. And then you won't need to know any of this. But I hope you do learn something from this.
Sure.
We covered the basics. Your program will go into a lot more depth.
Right.
And I think it's great. I've seen clips of it, and it looks phenomenal.
Cool.
What else did we? I guess we're gonna kind of potentially end on any zany studio recording story that you have, or anything kind of new technology that's come out, or anything, things that are changing, anything that comes to mind.
Sure. Regarding technology, I mean, based on what's happening lately with people not being able to get together, there are some technologies that were out prior to the pandemic that allowed people to be remotely recording together.
Sure.
So there's a number of things that I'm kind of looking into, and I'm not really sure how effective they are or the cost. They're not cheap.
Sure.
So when you get into remote recording, there's some technologies that are available to you. Some of them, there's one called Jam Kazam, and there's one called Audio Movers. There's products out there that are used for collaborative live sessions.
Mm-hmm. I've seen that. I've seen that online. I mean, some people record it, and then it looks like it's live, but it's not necessarily live. But then
it just allows you to have a live session with people, and it deals with the latency issues that we've experienced with lagging of previously. So it's not as expensive as like what they used to have to do with like satellite feeds and things like that.
Right.
But it's a service that if you
we're live via satellite right now.
Yeah.
You didn't know that?
Yeah. But if we need to, like for instance, it's much easier. I mean, it's happened prior to the pandemic, but it's easier for someone to say, okay, I'm going to have such and such a person in LA track a guitar part for me, but I want to be there in theory, I want to be there.
Sure.
And instead of flying them out,
Right.
putting them up in a hotel,
Yeah.
paying them on top of that, just so you can have a track, it's much easier to kind of have a subscription service that you can have a couple hours on this service, not pay that person to come out and all that stuff. So those things have been happening prior, but I think it's expedited that, and those tools are going to be elevated, and I would imagine they'll probably come down in price so that they can bring in more, have more of a client base. So I'm looking into that. I had a session yesterday on Zoom, which was not a live session, but it was somebody reviewing a bunch of guitar parts. He wanted me to, so he hired a singer. He hired a guitar player. The guitar player sent me tracks.
Right.
And I put him into the song just to kind of hear what he did. And the client wanted to hear the parts and make some decisions on what he wanted me to edit. So we did that online, and it wasn't a playing back thing, but he could hear the music. I just used my 2-channel interface. I talked into one channel. I put a mic near the speaker, and he was able to say yes and no on certain takes and where I should edit. I took notes, and so he didn't even have to come to the studio for that 1-hour session.
No, that's great.
And I can finish the song up, and then bill him for the time that we used and that kind of stuff. So it's really helpful to have that. This whole online technology is really helping artists to collaborate, fully.
Right.
So
yeah, no, that's good. That's good.
yeah.
So we at Video Creators Lounge are continuing to have local musicians here. As you've seen, some of the we've had some phenomenal
really
musicians.
great.
We originally started targeting up and coming musicians, but everyone that's come in here, I mean, they sound like professionals. Part of the reason why they sound so good is because of your advice that you've given me, which has been wildly helpful. And it's been a very fun experience. So if you want to get in contact with Big T Productions, the link is below. If you haven't subscribed to our channel on YouTube or Facebook and followed us there, go ahead and do so, because we're going to be having future live performances, a couple news shows, and we have a weekly news show that goes over a lot of film and video and acting and things like that too. So listen, I'm thrilled that you came by. Totally, I could talk about audio all day. There was so much more advanced stuff that we didn't talk about, but again, that's what your program is for.
Yeah.
And if you're thinking about it, definitely check it out, or just contact Tony
just let me know
directly, and you provide any advice and help. And if you are a musician, you need to go to the studio, this is where I would go.
Just let me know.
Yeah, great.
Cool.
Well, I think that ends it. We're gonna wrap things up here, and if you're watching, thanks for watching, and give the thumbs up and all of that good stuff, and check out Big T Productions website, his Facebook page, and all of that, even though he doesn't post as frequently as we would all like, but he'll start posting a little bit more as time goes on.
Yeah.
So that's it. Thank you all for watching, and we'll wrap it up now.
Thanks.